Hello guys, Art-Teeves here. In this video, I'll walk you through the sped-up process of modeling, unwrapping and texturing a stylized cap model using 3ds Max 2024, Rizom UV and Substance Painter. In 3ds Max, I'll use the loop regularizer script and the weighted normals modifier. Not sure if it's included with Max or needs a separate download these days. This process is sped up 6 times, with repetitive moments and early blockouts edited out. I didn't use a reference image, so I created multiple versions of same elements, but only the final model is shown. The entire process took 8 to 9 hours, too long for a single video, so it's condensed for your viewing. To follow along, you can slow the video down, play your own music, and use the subtitles for guidance. A table of contents is also available. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing. Since this video is lengthy, I won't narrate the entire thing. Instead, I'll introduce each section with a brief narration explaining the process, then let the visuals take over until the next section. Before diving into modeling details, here's the pipeline overview. The cap is divided into 3 parts: the cab and the horse, modeled as a single object, the wheels, and the rear luggage crate. The cab and the horse, modeled as a single object, comprise approximately 13.3K polygons. The rear luggage crate consists of 2.3K polygons, a count that could be further reduced through manual retopology. No retopology was performed for this model, nor was a high poly version baked to a low poly version. The wheels also have 2.3K polygons, which is somewhat excessive. Reducing their detail would not compromise quality. In retrospect, removing the inner chamfers and reducing the spokes from 8 sides to 6 or 4 could maintain visual fidelity while lowering the polygon count. The polygon count is moderate for an indie game asset, particularly for a combined model like the cab and the horse. It places the model in the mid-poly range, suitable for modern indie games targeting mid to high-end platforms, but potentially excessive for lower-end platforms or VR without optimization. Baking a high poly version to a low poly model with normal maps could significantly reduce the polygon count while preserving detail, which is critical for performance in game assets. The wheels and the luggage crate are ideal candidates for optimization to enhance performance without noticeable visual degradation. For a polished indie game asset, the target polygon count would ideally be between 8K and 10K polygons. While this model is functional for mid to high-end platforms, it risks performance issues in complex scenes or on lower-end devices. The entire model uses a single 4K resolution UV map with a 32 pixel padding. Some UVs are overlapping. This padding is generous and may result in slightly blurry textures upon close inspection, unless the UVs are carefully optimized. A 32 pixel padding minimizes texture bleeding, which is particularly beneficial for real-time rendering in game engines with a complex model featuring numerous seams. While this approach increases file size, it ensures excellent rendering stability. The model is divided into 3 elements for specific reasons. Initially, I planned to unwrap the luggage crate to a separate UV map, making it a standalone object. The wheels are separated from the carriage to enable rotation. The horse's legs do not require separation, as their rubber joints can be animated using the cat rig and the built-in spider helper. I have no plans to animate this model in the near future. In retrospect, assigning the luggage crate a separate UV map would have made it easily detachable and avoided incorporating such a detailed element into the main model. Additionally, I neglected to scale down the UV chunks of the crate's interior, an oversight I now recognize. Live and learn. With the workflow established, let's dive into the modeling process. I begin by creating an improvised cap using the NURBS process, which is ideal for improvisation and mimics sculpting. Starting with a simple box, I enable NURBS with 2 iterations. Spend sufficient time in the NURBS process before converting to an editable poly, as modifications become challenging post-conversion. At this stage, I block out the organic shape, leaving windows, lights, pipes and other details for later in the polygon modeling phase. After converting the model to an editable poly, I focus on reducing the polygon count. Given the model's organic nature, I aim for smooth curves without excessive supporting edges, keeping polygons as close to square as possible. For windows, portholes or pipes, I surround them with a supporting loop of near-square polygons. If you plan to apply TurboSmooth, avoid triangles. Since I'm not using TurboSmooth, I occasionally add triangles, primarily on flat geometry, to reduce the polygon count or simplify the size of specific openings. Modern game engines handle angles well, but I avoid them out of habit. For mechanical details like lamp edges, which aren't smooth, I apply a single chamfer. Thin elements require more polygons to accurately capture their shape, especially for smooth curves or edges. Thicker elements with simpler, broader surfaces need fewer polygons to maintain the stylized look. By reducing polygon counts, the model becomes less complex, improving performance in games or rendering while preserving visual quality. To streamline the modeling process, I split the cap into two sides and delete the left side, focusing on one side before applying the symmetry tool. For large 3D models like vehicles, creating a central ridge, a dividing line down the middle, allows for mirrored textures. This approach reuses the same texture data on both sides by overlapping their UV maps, reducing the number of unique textures needed. This saves memory, simplifies texturing, and ensures a consistent appearance. However, I deviate from this method by applying the FFD modifier, breaking the symmetry for added detail. The interior of the cab is crafted using simple polygon modeling. While a shell modifier could be applied to detached parts, manual modeling offers greater control over the shape unbound by the exterior geometry. When adding supporting edge loops manually, I take time to adjust vertices, rebalancing polygons to ensure even geometry distribution. To flatten surfaces accurately, I switch to the local coordinate system and scale along the relevant axis, ensuring axis constraints are disabled. When moving vertices, I enable edge constraints and occasionally use plane constraints for precision. All corner edges of the cab's windows and doors are chamfered into 3 edges each, with supporting edge loops added to minimize triangles. Some triangles remain, particularly inside the cabin, but they have minimal impact on shading and are rarely visible from most angles. Both internal and external edges of windows and doors receive smooth single chamfers. The NURMS process results in supports or handles, those elements connecting the cab's bottom to its roof, having 16 sides. This is slightly excessive. Reducing them to 12 sides would not affect visual quality. I manually edit polygons to eliminate overly stretched or distorted geometry, ensuring satisfaction with the topology before proceeding. After finishing one side, I duplicate it and optionally break symmetry using the FFD modifier, carefully monitoring topology and shading. To add rooftop lights, I create their holders using splines and loft them, assigning each of them 8 sides. The 8-sided shape originates from chamfering a vertex on the cab's roof with 0 iterations, producing a basic square. Applying a single tessellate modifier from the Subdivision tab transforms it into an 8-sided shape. I then delete the square's polygons, creating an open edge loop. Using the loop regularizer script, or rapid tools if preferred, I convert this edge loop into a perfect circle. Next I connect the newly formed vertices to their corresponding opposite vertices, encircling the openings with loops of near square polygons or adjusting vertices to form supporting circles. If vertices are too distant, I add a new edge loop. With a lofted cylinder and a corresponding orifice in the roof, I delete the loft's bottom polygon loop and cap, attach the lofted object to the model, and bridge them together. I ensure the lofts are not symmetrical to maintain visual variety. I'll resume the narration in the next part of the video. I create the lamps using 16-sided spheres. To form a lamp, I start with a hemisphere, shrink its top counterpart using the FFD modifier, and then bridge it to the frame of the original hemisphere. To bridge an 8-sided loaf to a 16-sided cylinder, I use the Modify Selection panel, selecting every second edge with the dot loop function and collapsing them. To position a lamp onto its corresponding whisker holder, I set the lamp's pivot point to the bottom of its central part and use the Select and Place tool with vertex snapping enabled. You may choose to vary the size of your lamps for visual diversity. The wheels feature 36 sides, which is excessive. Each wheel has 9 8-sided spokes, also an overkill. 4-sided spokes would suffice, as wheels are rarely observed closely. Unlike bicycle wheels, where spokes are typically baked, these are not. Chamfering the edges of each spoke added nearly 300 unnecessary polygons, an oversight on my part. Creating the wheels was straightforward. I chamfered corresponding vertices once, tessellated the resulting squares, deleted them, and converted their open edges into circles using the loop regularizer script. I added a couple of support loops to refine the topology. Once satisfied, I duplicated the wheel segment 8 times, rotating each copy by 40 degrees around a single pivot point. I chamfered both the metal and wooden parts of each wheel, which in retrospect was unnecessary. Since wheels aren't viewed up close, chamfering could be skipped, and overlapping UV chucks could be used for texturing to save resources. The wheels are connected by an 18-sided axle, which is also excessive. 12 or 10 sides would be adequate. For asynchronous movement, such as in car models for racing games, splitting the axle into 2 parts could be considered. At this stage, it's worth evaluating how the cart will handle turns and maneuverability. After completing the wheels, I added a single chamfer to all internal edges of the cab's cabin. The leather luggage crate was modeled using the NURMS process. I kept the design simple, removing most of its internal geometry and attaching the belt to its top. The belt's holes were created by subtracting boolean cutters from detached parts of the main model. Each hole has 8 sides with a single chamfer, and the bag's rivets also have 8 sides. Apologize for the abrupt transition. I likely paused the recording accidentally. After applying the shell modifier, I re-enabled NURMS, cleaned the topology, and pulled the bag's side while holding the shift key to extrude it. I added support edges near each angle transition to maintain clean geometry. Once satisfied with the geometry, I converted the NURMS object to an editable poly and significantly reduced its polygon count. I didn't adjust the left side or right when viewing the cap from behind, as I used the symmetry tool to complete it. Attention should be given to the crate's inner geometry. Since it's not designed to open during animation, the bottom can either be removed entirely or left as is, with the corresponding UV chucks scaled down to optimize texturing. I chose an almost rectangular shape for the crate to minimize polygon count. More curved designs would require additional polygons. The belt was extruded directly from the model, similar to the buckle. Initially, I surrounded the buckle with triangles, but they negatively affected shading, so I removed them and added support loops instead. Triangles could have been used on the crate's inner part to save polygons, but I didn't pursue this. Since the crate won't open, I used the Pro Boolean tool to attach the belt to the buckle. When adding details, I adhered to the stylized approach, focusing on bold, thick elements rather than intricate details, especially for the buckle and rivets. As mentioned earlier, modeling the crate as a separate object with its own UV map would allow for easier replacement or repositioning, such as having a character carry it. For the belt's holes, I didn't maintain uniform spacing, adjusting their positions intuitively. Each hole has 8 sides and a single chamfer. The buckle's sides initially had 8 sides each. I added a cylinder to each side, giving them 2 chamfers. Alternatively, I could have attached 8-sided hemispheres using the Select and Place tool with vertex snapping enabled. To attach the belt to the buckle without disrupting topology, I detached the intersecting parts, applied the Pro Boolean tool, and reattached them after verifying the topology. Finally, I used the selection panel to check for angons and deploy the 3ds Max's X-View tool to scan for overlapping or isolated vertices and open edges. Afterward, I reset the crate's scale, rotation and X-form, positioning its pivot point at the bottom of its central part. Next, I created the supports for the rear basket. I began by modeling two 8-sided cylinders, bending one slightly to set its overall direction, and also bending the other by 90 degrees. After merging them, I applied the symmetry tool to form a complete arc. Then I created a 90-degree intersection using a small 8-sided cylinder and an even smaller cylinder. Once completed, I attached this intersection to the arc and duplicated it 3 times to form an improvised cage. I applied the symmetry tool again to finalize the structure. Attaching the support to the cart was straightforward. I chamfered a few vertices on the cat's back, tessellated the resulting squares, deleted them, and regularized the resulting vertices to create circular edges. I then made simple attachment points, connected the metal arc, and bridged it to the corresponding orifices. While the polygon count of the bent parts could have been reduced, I chose to keep it as is, considering the rear basket will often be viewed from behind. The minor polygon savings wouldn't justify compromising the delicate curves of this prominent element. In retrospect, I could have designed the supports to be thicker and more massive, requiring only 2 intersecting bars instead of 3. For stylized models, it's best to avoid small details and focus on bold, robust shapes. I modeled large 8-sided wheel attachment points. When creating vehicles, realism isn't always necessary, especially if the model is only viewed from above in a game. You can skip inner geometry that won't be visible. Many modelers omit such details entirely, allowing parts of the axle to vanish beneath the vehicle or carriage without issue. However, since my design is quite open, I opted for a detailed and polished approach. I included subtle attachment points on the cylinders and added a couple of chamfers, which was arguably excessive. Next, I repositioned some bars to create space for an additional support. I connected the wheel model to the carriage's luggage crate using a pair of 8-sided splines. Note that the more curved these splines are, the higher the polygon count they require. Finally, I attached the completed model to the bottom of the cart and duplicated it to the other side of the cab. The head of the improvised horse was crafted from an 18-sided cylinder. I modeled the side signal elements and eyes separately, attaching them manually. The side signal pipes have 12 sides, while the eye stalks and the small antenna each have 8 sides. Ensure frontal elements have sufficient support edges to allow proper bending and achieve clean shading. You can model one side of the head and mirror it to the other side. I added the antenna to break symmetry after finalizing the rest of the head. When modeling cylindrical intersections, circle each with a loop of near square polygons to maintain clean topology. Assigning too many sides to side elements complicates their attachment to the main cylinder. While you can keep them as separate objects, I chose to integrate everything into a single piece. To combine parts, I detached the intersecting elements, used the Proline tool to merge them, and manually rebuilt the topology. As usual, I applied a single decorative chamfer to all technical elements. When adjusting the head's size, referencing an image or creating a simple blockout can help. I skipped this step and spent considerable time experimenting with different body variations. After several experiments, I opted to create the body using the NURMS process, resulting in 32 sides on its bottom part. I prepared initial orifices for the frontal light and the horse's neck. Each opening was assigned 16 sides, sufficient for accommodating the corresponding objects. These openings can be regularized during the NURMS stage or later in the polygon modeling phase. Many angle adjustments were made by rotating the orifices, removing associated geometry, and adding new loops while holding the Shift key. The frontal light was created by compressing a hemisphere using the FFD modifier. It was positioned using the Select and Place tool with vertex snapping enabled, then breached into the model. The bottom part of the horse's body was modeled as a NURMS object. The key is to ensure the side count matches the corresponding object, in this case 32 sides on the top part. I worked solely on the left side, creating two leg attachment points. Once satisfied with geometry and angles, I applied the symmetry tool, resulting in 16-sided openings from the NURMS process. A blockout can streamline the workflow at this stage, helping to plan leg shapes and attachment points in advance. I spent time adjusting edges, adding auxiliary edge loops as needed to support the new geometry. Finally, I removed unnecessary edge loops and adjusted vertices with the edge constraint function enabled. Inner geometry requires minimal attention since it won't be visible. Similarly, corresponding UV chucks should be scaled down for efficiency. Ensure polygons do not stretch excessively or intersect, and avoid creating hidden geometry that the player or the viewer won't see. The neck was created as a loft object. Since the head opening had 18 sides, I collapsed two opposing sides and regularized the remaining sides into a perfect circle using the loop regularizer script. I designed the neck as metal, which prevents animation via a bond system. To address this, the neck could be separated from the model or textured with rubber elements to justify potential bending. For more robotic animation, the neck should be divided into multiple objects. Bendable elements require sufficient sides to flex properly and should be modeled close to an improvised T-pose for proper stretching. For UVs, I used Rizom UV to straighten them quickly and accurately. I created several blockouts of potential leg designs, which were excluded from this video. Ultimately, I combined spider-like legs with metal cylinders and multiple bendable rubber joints. Unfortunately, I paused recording while adjusting their shapes on one side of the horse, but this involved basic polygon modeling, so no critical steps were missed. To compensate, I recreated the process while modeling the rear leg. Since both legs are attached to the model with rubber joints, they can be merged and animated using the CAD system with the spider preset, as demonstrated in one of my previous videos. Ensure the topology of each leg is optimized while retaining enough segments in the joints for proper bending. Straighten all corresponding UV chucks to support smooth bending and texturing, avoiding limitations from curved UVs. I verified that both hooves contact the ground at the same height, aligning with the lowest point of each wheel. Once satisfied with the legs, I mirrored them to the other side of the horse. I considered various methods to connect the cap to the robot horse and decided that the bottom pipes would suffice. For a more detailed model, or one involving baking, I would have designed a joint similar to those used in trailers. However, to avoid unnecessary complexity, I kept it simple. The attachment points, each with 8 sides, were created by chamfering vertices consistent with other small openings. While I could have used a loft for the pipes, I opted for a more rigid design, applying the bend modifier to shape their trajectory. I removed unnecessary side loops from the pipes, as their curves are unlikely to be scrutinized from below. I switched to a local coordinate system to move planes along their local axis and positioned the pivot point at each pipe's rotation point. Then I created corresponding attachment points for each pipe and merged the cap and the horse together. I avoided using the symmetry tool, as neither the cap nor the horse is symmetrical. To further break symmetry, I slightly bent both pipes. I overlooked one detail. I intended to add rubber parts where the pipes connect to the horse. Without additional geometry, these areas cannot support animation, such as the cap swaying or swinging during movement, as rigid pipes would restrict vertical motion. To address this, I added geometry layer, which you'll see during the texturing phase. This part is universal, so I'll repeat most of the things I've mentioned in my previous videos. When it comes to final adjustments and checks, I group my objects, parent them to the cap, set its pivot point to the middle of its bottom part, and place the whole group to 000 scene coordinates. Then I use a selection panel to scan my meshes for remaining angons. Technically, you can also remove poles and make sure there aren't many vertices that connect 6 or more edges. Next, I use the 3ds Max's Axio tool to scan my model for some overlapping or isolated vertices and open edges. I also reset the scale, rotation and X-form of most elements and set their pivot points manually. If you used mirroring or symmetry while modeling, it's especially important to reset the X-form of your model and make sure that there are no flip normals remaining. Just make sure to save your file before resetting the X-form. Finally, I proceed to assign my smoothing groups. There's nothing special about it, but once you are done, you can also apply the weighted normals modifier to your model. Just make sure to set smoothing groups meticulously and mind that they will impact unwrapping. Normally, hard edges require corresponding UV splits for padding, but UV splits do not require hard edges. Hard edge placement is about controlling low poly smoothing behavior and baked normal gradation. UV seam placement is about optimizing usable texture space while also limiting texture distortion. Bringing the two together is about balancing visual quality with resource efficiency. Using fewer hard edges and UV splits tend to be more resource efficient, but it's also important to make sure that the final product looks good. Since my model lacks transparent elements, I unwrapped it to a single 4K resolution map with a 32 pixel padding. As noted earlier, separating the luggage crate to its own UV map would facilitate making it detachable. I got carried away and began unwrapping in 3ds Max, which isn't ideal if you have access to Rizom UV, Blender or robust Max plugins. Given the model's simplicity, I split the UVs based on existing hard edges and manually added seams where needed. In Rizom UV, I exploded all cylinders and straightened everything possible except for cones and curved parts. Pipes and rubber joints were straightened to ensure proper texturing and flexibility. I normalized UV chucks and manually rescaled some, considering their proportions relative to neighboring elements. Visually prominent elements received more texture space, while obscured or less visible UV chucks were scaled down. When adjusting UV island sizes, I maintained relative proportions within the same object, keeping size variations within 20% of neighboring elements. Uniform scaling per element is critical. Uneven scaling creates visible seams that Substance Painter cannot correct. Key hotkeys for the workflow inside Rizom UV include C for cut, Alt-G for stack, Shift-Alt-G for stack overlapped, G for group, and Ctrl-G to remove grouping. My UV process was far from optimal. I repacked the map multiple times to better group and stack UVs. Initially, I neglected to stack some leg and wheel elements, and with the high padding, these small chunks consumed excessive UV space, resulting in blurry textures. I later adjusted the map to stack them properly. Grouping is key for such models. Stack parts that are barely visible or small elements that consume excessive UV space. As mentioned earlier, adding essential reach to the horse or cap would allow reusing UV chucks for both sides. The same approach could apply to the cap's inner chucks if not viewed internally. UV seam placement depends on whether you want seams exposed for Substance Painter's clone stamp tool or hidden, in which case triplanar texture projection can be used. I forgot to scale down the inner UV chucks of the luggage crate and potentially scale up its outer chucks. In Rizom UV, dark blue wheels indicate flipped normals on the 3D model, meaning the polygon surfaces face wrong direction. Resetting X-form or using the Edit Normals modifier typically resolves this. I also recommend increasing the scale of small but critical elements like chamfers to prevent texture bleeding. Finally, I repacked all desired elements, ensured materials were properly named and assigned, and completed work in 3ds Max. Before finishing, I exploded the model, pulling the card's elements apart to prevent interference during ambient occlusion baking. When baking my model, I set the highest possible amount of raise on all tabs, disabled the ID section, and switched my subsampling to 16. I've also made sure that there were no purple lines on my model. Purple lines in Substance Painter, particularly during baking, indicate hard edges on your mesh that lack corresponding UV seams. This means the mesh has sharp angles defined in your 3D modeling software, but the UV layout doesn't properly separate those areas for baking process. This can lead to artifacts like black lines or shading issues on the final texture. My texturing process was relatively straightforward, relying heavily on preset smart materials rather than hand painting, which would have maximized the model's potential. I added a few grunge effects and extra paint layers to existing materials. The Luggage crate combined a stylized look with semi-realistic aesthetic of the card, with edge highlights applied. I disabled the metallic settings for its rivets and buckle. The carriage used the default steel-painted scrape dirty smart material, enhanced with an additional paint layer and some grunge. A modified version of this material was applied to decorative elements, and another variation was used for the horse. The cab's interior received the leatherette damaged the default material, accented with a frame painted using the custom decorative material and the Paint Along Pass tool. Metal elements were textured with the steel medieval stylized smart material, while wooden elements received the wood sheep hull old material. To conceal most UV seams, I set the material projection method to triplanar. Remaining seams were addressed using the clone stamp tool, adjusting the brush flow as needed, with the layers blending options set to pass through across all channels. The rubber parts were textured with the rubber dry preset smart material, supplemented by a fill layer with reduced height and a stripes fill, rotated from 45 to 135 degrees. The lights used the plastic dusty smart material, with the emission channel enabled in the texture set settings menu and added to each component. I assigned the base color to the lights in case emission is disabled later. To cover any remaining UV seams, I created a fixed layer, set all of its blending options to pass through, and used the clone stamp tool to paint over visible seams. Periodically, rotate the environment to test the model under different lighting conditions and check it with various lighting settings and light maps. Ensure all bendable parts intended for animation use the rubber material. As mentioned previously, I was dissatisfied with the UV map and wanted to stack small chamfered elements. I'd made subtle adjustments to the UV map, re-inputted the model, rebaked it, and reassigned existing materials to their new elements. I omitted most of the tedious reassignment process from the video, as it was lengthy and unengaging. The horse's nose was textured with a superhero fabric preset smart material, featuring an upscaled hexagon pattern, which I often use for texturing speakers. And this is it. I think I've mentioned everything I intended to share. I'll leave you here to watch the rest of the video. Thanks for watching. If you find my videos helpful, please subscribe to my channel for more stylized content. And most importantly, have a great day.